If there is one thing that From Software is good at, it's making challenging games. Armored Core is, of course, not an exception to this rule, and every single one of the games has some sort of mission that makes a raven groan at just its mentioning. In this top 10 list, we will be going over those missions, but with a bit of a limitation. I'll actually only be including one boss level mission, aka the final mission along one of the game's story paths. I will also only try to keep it limited to one mission per game. We all know that Armored Core Last Raven is the undisputed champion of crushingly difficult missions, but maybe you might find a mission here from a game you haven't played. Also, it is worth mentioning that almost every mission in a game can be cheesed or have an alternate strategy that trivializes the encounter. We aren't going to be worrying about those on this list, as we want to capture the frustration that new players would catch on their first playthrough. Lastly, frustration does not always mean challenge. A mission just won't make the list because it's hard, but it will certainly be a factor. Placing an Armored Core 5 or Verdict Day mission would be difficult, as like in some other FromSoft games, mercenaries, or players that you could hire to help you, are present. This allows you to be carried by other players to complete missions, which is not the case in any other Armored Core game. Starting off at number 10 is the Generation 2 mission, Underground Lab, from Armored Core 2. It pays 75,000 credits, quite high for missions in the second generation of games, and is acquired in the last quarter of the story. Underground Lab isn't horrible compared to some of the other missions on this list, but has the early gen problem of too many things to kill, then fight a boss mission pattern. Now, most of the way through Gen 2, you're probably used to this, but this mission is especially bad with the amount of disorder units, flying shotgun enemies, and finally the dual moonlight wielding disorder boss. The boss isn't particularly difficult to kill if you can hit it, but if you are battered by getting to the final portion of the mission, you might not have that much ammunition left. This is only exacerbated by the fact that if the boss hits you, they will most likely finish off what armor points you have left, especially if you try to engage in blade combat. Again, the mission isn't too difficult, but at this point in the game timeline, large amounts of enemies in tight quarters with a boss demanded a certain type of build, and if you didn't have a consistent mission running build, this one was kind of a groaner and occupies the number 10 spot. Number 9 isn't so much of a single mission as much as it is the concept of how missions work. Number 9 on this list is the Raven tests from Armored Core Ninebreaker. For those who haven't played AC Ninebreaker, it is by far the most unique of the games, but was very much an interim game between Armored Core Nexus and Armored Core Last Raven. Taking the form of a training simulator, Armored Core Ninebreaker had a plethora of different tasks that the player could perform that would test the player's movement capabilities, offensive targeting, and precision for landing, as well as other tasks that frankly just came from playing the game. Where the issue comes in is that to get gold rank on these tests, you almost universally would have to have a specific AC tuned to that task. For example, if you were doing the vertical movement challenge, you were actively hampering yourself by equipping any parts that would either slow you down or impede your energy regen capacity. Unfortunately, the most important items on your AC in missions in other games, your weapons, both do those things. So you would be actively training your AC in a scenario that is not fully realistic to the gameplay you'd be experiencing. This doesn't inherently make the AC training missions bad, but the fact that you are punished for wanting to use the AC that you built in the training simulator game can be a point of frustration for players. This issue is also magnified by the fact that you do not have a shop. relying on importing your Armored Core Nexus file to have a moderately functioning AC. And if the file you imported did not have every piece of equipment from another game, you might not have the parts needed to actually clear the tests. Ninebreaker isn't a bad game for this, but its questionable design decisions in this regard gives it our number 9 spot. Moving into number 8 is a legendary pick that many young Ravens had the displeasure of dealing with in the beginning of their Armored Core journey. Stop Gas Exposure from Armored Core 1 is a mission just after the halfway point of the game, given to the player by Raven's Nest themselves, where they are tasked with planting 5 detonation devices on malfunctioning gas generators. Stop Gas Exposure is infamous in the Armored Core community for being just a pain in the rear. The entire level, short of the entrance, is flooded with a bright magenta gas that causes defense-ignoring damage to your AC continuously for as long as the AC is in the facility. This is one of the few missions in the game where if you do not know where you're going, you require an auto map, as you don't have enough time to explore and find where you need to go if you happen to have a head that does not record auto map data. The similar looking layout of the facility can turn you around without much effort. The only landmarks you have to help you guide your way are the doors leading to the bomb rooms themselves, or by entering an area with no enemies because you have already killed them. On top of the constant damage, which rules out viable use of heavy bipedal ACs or tank tread ACs, the only enemies besides small gun turrets at the beginning are highly resistant to energy damage, which also rules out the use of energy weapons. If that isn't enough, as a final little wink before throwing you into the facility, the area that the game spawns you looking at does not actually lead to any gas generators, unless you destroy a hidden wall to connect to the other part of the facility. While destroying the MTs on the map can almost double your payday, it frankly is not worth the risk for people doing the mission for the first time, as they will need all the time they can get to just find the right path and the 5 gas generators. Between limiting almost half the weapons and excluding an entire weight class, requiring an auto map feature, and just generally being a miserable experience, Stop Gas Exposure claims the number 8 spot. Number 7 follows on the heels of Stop Gas Exposure with the Generation 3 mission, Destroy Massive Weapon, from Armored Core 3. Another mission that punishes the player for taking the incorrect setup, this time even more specific than Stop Gas Exposure. Destroy Massive Weapon is a mission requested by Mirage that tasks the Raven with destroying a weapon in the submerged city district of City 732. They warn the Raven to take care around the water, but that is the only hint a player will get that they should take hover-type legs or suffer. Destroy Massive Weapon takes place in a massive arena that is approximately 80% water, and touching this water with anything other than hover legs is instant death. Earlier generation games had the policy that an AC was completely inoperable if their knees went below water level. This design choice makes this decision, frankly, much more difficult than it needs to be. If the pilot is confident in their skills, they would be able to land on the weapon to smash it with hard-hitting weapons before flying away and hopefully having enough energy to land on one of the few buildings around the area. This is a problem, however, as the massive weapon can submerge and instantly kill the player if they are too busy focusing on hitting the target. The boss isn't defenseless, however, with dual grenade launchers, being able to go underwater and fire vertical missiles, and AC tracking exceed orbits. The DC-101D is far from defenseless. Again, with the proper setup, the fight isn't that difficult, but for majority of players who aren't using a hover setup and don't know what they are getting into, the punishment is far too severe for how little warning the player gets. You can also find the KWB Mars on this level, which is in our strongest weapons list, but because of these difficulty factors, Gen 3's Destroy Massive Weapon gets the number 7 spot. For number 6, we are hitting a new style of infamous mission. time limit missions. And while Armored Core 4's Juggernaut doesn't literally have a clock you have to follow, it has a little progress line instead. You need to destroy the massive weapon in the quickest amount of time possible, or you will get gunned down, and you can fail if you take too long. Juggernaut is another one of those missions where AC pilots are once again punished for playing anything but the hardest hitting weapons. While the fight can be mostly trivialized by the use of 2 blades, one on each arm, and repeatedly punching the monster machine, or using a grenade weapon using its huge explosion radius to hit all the weak points no matter where you aim, any sort of sustained combat AC is thoroughly punished. Sniper rifles, normal rifles, machine guns, pulse rifles, missiles, and handguns are all nigh useless on this mission, and they're some of the coolest parts of Armored Core 4. This fact is only made more obvious that the whole fight you're being pushed towards the camera, making shooting the giant, bright, glowing weak spots harder than it looks. The little blades, the dozer things on the front of the weapon, block your shots, and you will be constantly fighting the camera as you struggle to knock out the primal armor rectifiers. It just doesn't feel good to play. On the upside, the mission is very intense and you feel the pressure. And when you inevitably fail the first attempt with your build, unless you're some sort of dual blade god on every other mission, you certainly will remember the feeling of helplessness as Fiona Jarnevelt begs you to stop the weapon. It is certainly nice that the pressure is not tied to some arbitrary timer where your operator says, "Oh, you ran out of time, Raven. Sorry." But that doesn't really set the bar too high for what makes this a good mission. Juggernaut runs our AC over to claim the number 6 spot. For number 5 is a mission that feels both extremely fair and extremely unfair at the same time. Another Generation 3 mission, this time from Armored Core Silent Line, Power Plant Emergency, requested by Kisaragi, is the end of the first chapter in our entry for this part on the list. Power Plant Emergency is actually quite a fun mission, putting you into an intense scenario where the Armored Core classic of a unknown threat is causing havoc in a volatile area. The pacing of the mission is quite well done, where the issue is in both the difficulty and artificial limits. In some, not all, Armored Core games, the shop is usually drip-fed items at a decent rate. A new set of arms here, new armaments there. But in Armored Core Silent Line, this is not the case. Enormous parts of the shop are missing from the start and are released in waves after completing certain missions. This can make the player feel like they have less options and in turn get frustrated at the fight. Of course, this issue can be partially mitigated by the fact that you could import your data from Armored Core 3 to have a better AC from the hop. But not all players would have this option in the early 2000s. It really can't be understated how few parts you have in comparison to the same point in time as Armored Core 3. You have usually at most one version of a type of weapon as opposed to the 3 or more you had in vanilla Armored Core 3. The fight is a good lesson in dodging quick projectiles and heat management, but unfortunately the AC boss in the power plant main area hits so hard and requires the player to clear the entire mission again just to take another shot at him. This can really put a damper on the player's mood and has contributed to the reputation of this level, so it gets the number 5 spot. Number 4 on this list will be going to the Generation 1 mission Confrontation from Armored Core Project Phantasma. Project Phantasma has a reputation among the community of being the black sheep of Generation 1. Sandwiched between 2 amazing games, Phantasma fell a little bit flat and was the least played, or at least the least liked, among Generation 1 games. A bit of a preview of things to come later on in the game. In this mission, the titular bad guy of the game, Stinger, commandeers the Phantasma weapon, taking it for a joyride. Confrontation isn't as outright inconvenient as other missions in the same game. Project Phantasma has a really bad habit of making missions that are exceptionally long and maze-like, usually with very few enemies for virtually no reason. But Confrontation is annoying mostly due to the fact that the enemies you fight are high HP damage sponges, which admittedly can be disposed of relatively quickly if you know how to airblade in Generation 1, and then a boss fight. Prototype Phantasma is a relatively fast, hard-hitting enemy. Although this incarnation of the Phantasma fight is quite a lot easier than the final boss version, this MT can still cut you down relatively quickly if you aren't at least a little bit mobile. It should also be mentioned that it's just unnecessarily annoying that the battlefield is a pure white blanket of snow. Enemies can be hard to see, and your radar will usually blend into the background, making target acquisition even harder. The mission can be a point of pain for players, since at this point, the game is alternating between annoying maze-like mission that lasts forever, and fight Stinger. Again. This, coupled with the fact that Phantasma is more of a miss of a game in the series, grants it our number 4 spot. Sneaking into the number 3 spot under the expected champion of this game is Destroy AC Sighthawk from the Generation 3.5 game Armored Core Last Raven. Now, I know most people will be in the comments and they'll say, Raven, the final mission on the Zenaida path is so much more difficult and frustrating. Trust me, it was a toss-up between these two. Zenaida is difficult, but is the final mission in a game with many paths. 6, in fact. The fact that the Zenaida mission is the undisputed hardest path in the hardest game means that players are usually girded to the difficulty and expect it to be hard. It also breaks our one final mission rule for our list, which will already be used. Sorry, Zenaida lovers, you'll have to wait for another time for me to talk about that monster. Now that I have addressed the purple elephant in the room, let's set our sights back on Sighthawk. The Sighthawk mission is in theory exceptionally simple. Fight another AC who is both lightweight and wily, and win. Where the frustrating part comes in is the fact that you are constantly being bombarded with unknown, unmanned aerial weapons. Being a mission in Last Raven, of course, the deck is stacked against you. Sighthawk can target the unknown enemies, but will rarely do so, and also has the luxury of not being targeted by them with their kamikaze attacks. On top of this, if you happen to lose sight of Sighthawk, which is easy being pushed around by the unmanned weapons, your radar is completely useless at helping you locate your target, as the radar display is saturated with falling unknowns. It probably goes without saying, but Sighthawk is quite good at closing the gap and applying pressure. His Last Raven incarnation is significantly more difficult than his Armored Core Nexus equivalent as well. The heat pressure from your constant boosting, the unmanned aerial weapon detonations, and his heavy machine gun and micro missile combo will have your AP whittled away at a pretty constant rate. The only real redeeming factor for the mission is the fact that if you do get lucky and smash the relatively low HP Sighthawk AC, the mission completes immediately since it's functionally an arena mission in spirit. Failures are also very quick to restart from. There is no running to the fight. For this, it gets our number 3 spot. Getting into the most recent Armored Core, at our penultimate spot is the newly most infamous Armored Core mission, Attack the Watchpoint. I'm sure our number 2 spot doesn't need much of an introduction to anyone who was on Armored Core social media or even just video game social media at the game's release. Attack the Watchpoint is what a lot of FromSoft fans classify as a filter boss, although in this case it's a filter mission, as in a mission that will filter out players who have not learned the mechanics of the game, with a boss that punishes a player greatly for bad habits. The start of the mission starts off normally with some exceptionally hard-hitting laser installations chipping away at our AP points before the inevitable boss fight that the players are expecting. Sula, a first-gen augmented human, is no slouch guarding the entrance to the Watchpoint. He actually gives the player a hint with his weapon loadout on how to beat the real boss of the level, with his alternating pulse weapons which cut through pulse armor, and high ACS building weapons, his detonating bazooka. Sula is not the actual boss for this mission, however, The true frustration has only just begun. Balteus is not for the faint of heart and is incredibly unforgiving for a Raven who has generally not understood the mechanics of the game, especially if the pilot has been mostly relying on ground-to-ground combat. Balteus is equipped to deal with almost any situation and can absolutely demolish an AC's AP pool if the pilot doesn't keep their head on a swivel. Pilots who have played the previous games may have noticed that the boss's missile patterns are eerily close to the scatter missile pattern from Armored Core 4 Answer and micro missiles from Armored Core Nexus. These missiles are dodged in the same way as those games, but unfortunately for the vast majority of players, these games were never played, or if they were, the knowledge was certainly not retained. These missiles were hands down the #1 complaint about the fight, so much so that FromSoft actually nerfed the fight about a week into the game's release. The missiles were not the only difficult thing, however. Dark Souls-like sweeps and smashes with the dual flamethrowers caught many a player off guard who were used to dodge rolling through damage, and a sobering reminder that this is an Armored Core game and not a Souls game frustrated many players at the time. This mission also was much like the Silent Line entry on this list. The shop was limited in what items you could actually purchase, and your enhancement points were not fully given to you at that point. While Balteus was hard, he was certainly not impossible, but so many people who were brand new to the franchise had their joyful mech piloting lights snuffed out by this boss, and they would agree that he deserves the #2 spot. At #1 is the one final mission I have decided to include on this list. It is the mission Occupation of Arteria Carpals, the final mission in the Old King path of Armored Core 4 Answer. For the uninitiated, both Armored Core 4 and Armored Core 4 Answer had the ability to do a hard version of every mission in the game, and Occupation of Arteria Carpals is no different from this. In this mission, you and Old King willingly stumble into a trap to kill pretty much the only Nex pilots left who are willing to stand against you. Of course, this means every high-ranked Nex, including Darva himself, and on hard mode, Sumika, who abandoned you for your reprehensible actions in previous missions on this story path. This mission is one of the few missions where the difficulty is just too high. Fighting 5 Nex functionally solo, Old King does almost nothing to help you here, is something that only a pilot with the absolute largest of ammo reserves can accomplish. A common theme on this list, having to completely overhaul a build that a player has used for most of the game for a single mission, is exceptionally frustrating. One of the great things about the Primal Armor system in 4 Answer was the fact that many builds were extremely effective against a variety of missions. Sure, a weapon might need to be swapped here or there, which is standard, but for Occupy Arteria Carpals, the overwhelmingly dominant strategy is either manipulating the AI to funnel into a spot one at a time, or using Kojima weapons fired through walls to beat the fight. That being said, I'm not saying the fight is impossible, far from it. Through pure grit, you can overcome the Nex, especially if Old King pulls his weight for a change and actually deals some damage. But because of just the absolute insane difficulty spike compared to the rest of the game, coupled with potentially having your build completely invalidated, pushes Occupation of Arteria Carpals to the #1 spot on this list. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this list. Was there any of these missions that gave you a headache? Are you upset that Zenaida didn't take the #1 spot? Let us know in the comments below. If you're looking for a few weapons that might be able to help you with these missions, check out this video. And I'll see you next time, Ravens.